Hello, I'm Smita Tharoor, and welcome to Stories of Unconscious Bias, a podcast where I ask guests from around the world to share their story and to reflect on their life experiences with unconscious bias. I hope you enjoy listening. They were recorded globally under COVID-19 lockdown conditions. We must all now know about the killing by police of George Floyd and its chaotic aftermath. There was another story that happened in Central Park, New York on the same day, just a few hours earlier. A white woman was offended that a black man, who was bird watching, asked her to follow the signs and leash her dog in a designated bird spotting area. She called the police and complained of the man's alleged threatening behavior. Her aggressive tone changed to one of fear when talking to the police. She sounded scared and deliberately told the police the man was African American. She has since apologized, saying she was genuinely frightened. Whether her instinctive reaction to a black man was one of fear, or she heightened it to be taken more seriously by police, this incident points to the same core issue. The unconscious biases of fear and suspicion towards black people are still deeply rooted in society. We must ask ourselves, how can we begin to challenge our own unconscious biases and change that narrative amongst our friends and family? My interview was recorded 7 weeks ago, before any of this had happened. Hello, welcome everybody. I'd like to introduce Brendan for our conversation on the unconscious bias. Brendan Gilbert is a born and bred Londoner of West Indian heritage who runs a security systems company based in South London. Brendan, thank you so very much for joining our conversation on the unconscious bias.
Morning.
So Brendan, you very kindly agreed to talk about unconscious bias. I'm wondering, what do you understand by those two words, unconscious bias?
Well, it's how can I put it? Expectations. So I'll give you an example. I'll probably go straight into it. Is for example, over the phone, someone will contact me, because of my accent, they will assume coming to the front door, it's an English guy, just from accent. But when I rock up and they see I'm sort of a black person, it's like, oh wow, you don't sound, on the phone. I was expecting, they don't tell you this, but you could detect I was expecting a white person to turn up to the front door. After a couple of minutes, they kind of, adjust to it, and you're invited in. But I might be wrong, but that's how kind of what I see as also that, sometimes if the person, maybe as an engineer, should you be a female or whatever, and you're going into someone's house and you're going in with a tool bag, oh, hang on a minute, I was expecting a male. I hope I'm right.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Brendan. And it's interesting that you've given that kind of example of the unconscious bias. So it just leads me into a story that I had the privilege of hearing from a British gas engineer, and I invite, I have a boiler service for my British gas, and the British gas engineer called 15 minutes before they come to say, hello, I'm the British gas engineer, I will be there with you in 15 minutes. And I said, yes, cool, that's totally fine. I heard the voice, it was a woman's voice, and she came, and when she left. But because of what I do for a living, I then subsequently had a lovely chat with her while she was in the house with me. And she said exactly what you said. She said the number of people who don't hear the first part of the sentence, when she says, hi, I'm the British gas engineer, they don't hear that. They just assume that it's probably the receptionist or some woman saying the British gas engineer, who will obviously be male, will turn up the door. So that idea of expecting a stranger to arrive at the door to do some work for you should look like so based on what you think you've heard on the phone and the assumptions or the conclusions that you've jumped to, is exactly an example of unconscious bias. And listeners listening to Brendan's accent will understand exactly what you mean, because hearing you, they will not know that you are of West Indian heritage and what the color of your skin is. So that's a great start, Brendan. So you obviously running a security systems company go to many people's homes, just like the British gas engineer does. And I bet you have many stories that you can share with us about unconscious bias, either your own or perhaps somebody else's. So could you share some stories with us?
Yeah, sure. Like many times, I mean, with security, you could imagine, it's very sensitive, and you would want to make sure who enters your property, you have that trust or you feel comfortable with. And from my accent over the phone, straight away you would. With some people, when you turn up to the front door, and they see you, as as sort of West Indian heritage, as a black person, I should say, they sort of put their backs up a bit, thinking, hang on a minute, this person will be coming into my house, and we have to do a risk assessment. If they haven't, if they need a system fitted, we'd have to do a risk assessment. So you are kind of walking around the property, and eventually, I mean, I'd say 80% of the time they become comfortable with you, because of the first sort of 10-15 minutes you have a conversation with them. They think, well, okay, he seems all right. But I've been doing it sort of over 20 odd years now. It's kind of noticeable still, but when I first started doing this, it was a lot more noticeable, and a bit uncomfortable as well. There is quite a lot of stories. If I've been recommended, so usually somebody might say, look, I've had work from this guy. Usually they're friends, and they will discuss it, and they will say, well, yes, he's this gentleman, I've used him, and they might even say, don't get surprised, he's a black guy. And when you rock up to the door, you get, the hugs and kisses, and you're offered, to walk in and crack on. But it is quite a lot of it still about, and what I find now, we tend to deal with more of the females, especially with domestic properties. And again, they, not all of them, but sometimes they've had an incident, or got to be, they've only called you around because they have to have something done. It's a system fitted. They're a lot more worried and a bit more scared. So, as a professional, what you have to do is, I kind of rock up to the front door, and I've kind of, like you would sort of preparing yourself going into a situation. So I kind of prepare myself on that sort of welcoming, and then address it, and then be a professional and crack on and do what I do best. And usually that, sort of helps, both parties there.
Right. So no, in fact, what I omitted to say for the point of listeners is that when I said Brendan runs a security systems company, I should have expanded on that. That includes fitting alarms in people's personal homes, and that is why you rock up at people's homes, and you meet the stranger, and you go into their home, and you fit their systems in their homes. Often we take it for granted everybody knows what the security systems company does. And maybe we all don't know what that means. So I thought I better actually I state it for the record. But to come back to the point that you were making, Brendan, so because you've been doing this for 20 years now, you're saying things have changed. What does that mean? From 20 years ago, you have changed, or the people you are meeting have changed? Could you expand a little bit on that?
Yes. So the people you're meeting. So, for example, back in the 90s, I remember as an apprentice, and going round with an engineer with a company I worked for, and we would explain sort of this situation, And he would warn me and say, look, this particular person don't particularly, um, at the time would say want coloured people in their house, you know. So when you go in, you stick by me, and literally we'll crack on and do the service. And then eventually, as I'd sort of gone through the apprentice, done the apprenticeship, and I was able to drive a van and go out and do the work myself. There was quite a few telephone calls made by some customers. Not all bad. There would be some, because I'm very chatty. So if you know me, I could come and have a conversation with you, and there'll be a lot of, out of five, let's say five, two or three will ring up and say, oh, could you send that coloured chap back? Because, I had a good conversation with him. But there was always sometimes a few of them would be like, well, where's the last bloke? Why have you sent this bloke? And, as an apprentice, you pick this up and think, oh, right, okay, they don't particularly like me. But I was sort of a bit younger, and you kind of just learning the job and go for it. And then eventually you start to, it's funny you say getting used to it, but people, I think now I find, especially around South London and within the M25, there's a lot of families now, which are mixed. So I think that has also changed as well. So when what was happening in '96 to now, we're say 2019, 2020, you find London has become very what's the word? Yeah, it's mixed. A lot of mixed families and whatever, and it's kind of a lot more kind of accepted, better than it was back then. So yes, people have changed. I think
Right.
over the time, going from the 90s, talking 20 years ago or 15 years ago, people are looking at it a lot different, which is good, which is
Which
good.
is great. Which is great. Because of course you're listening to you. I was just thinking, you are so polite in the way, the language that you were using right now. Essentially, what you were saying is, I was an apprentice. I'm black. I was working with a
Mm.
white man. Sorry to say it as bluntly as this. And then people, and this person who was hiring you as an apprentice said to you to be careful, because a lot of people would not like the look of you purely because of the color of your skin. And then, of course, some of them took to you because you're just a nice bloke, and they looked beyond anything else. They enjoyed talking to you, but they still differentiated by asking for the, in inverted commas, the colored bloke to come back,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
which is also says a lot about the individuals themselves and their attitude towards race, because of course we don't use language like that or speak like that. So that's a very interesting aspect of the experiences that you have gone through in the life that you know in your work experience. But what about you, Brendan? I bet that you, as I and anybody else, has unconscious biases too. So, what kind of unconscious biases do you think you have experienced within yourself? And then looking back, you realize, with the benefit of hindsight, whoops, did I jump to that conclusion? Should I have thought differently? I'm wondering whether you can be kind enough to share one of your other kind of stories from another angle.
I suppose will have my own sort of judgment at times, which you keep to yourself, and as you do as human being, you keep to yourself, think, well, hang on, I'm pretty open. I am pretty open when if I deal with an I will talk to anyone, but like I do, like I said, build up sometimes my own little judgment maybe before I go and do something. And um, right, yeah. For example, going to a client, maybe I for example, a white English client, and before I get on that drive, it's thinking, oh, here we go. I could see the look of that now. I'm going to have some trouble here, and that's a kind of judgment I've made before even saying hello to the person, and then sort of the minute I get to the front, there's a handshake, and you think, oh, hang on, it's not as bad as I thought. I think we all have a bit. I mean, personally for me, I try to. I don't know. I think that's probably why I probably survive. Is that try and treat people the way that I would want to be treated, no matter what you are, what colour you are, um, sexuality, whatever. We're all human beings. Let's just get on. And I think that's where I've kind of, say brush it off, but able to keep going. I speak to a few people and it really rubs them up the wrong way, and they feel, they can't continue what they do. And I was like, no, come on, you got to get on with it. One, you got to feed your family. So, it's a job I love doing, and I think, it's the sort of last thing I want to do is to let something like that bother me. It might itch you for the first couple of minutes, first sort of 10-15 minutes. I think one day, very quickly, I was central London, and I noticed the traffic warden who was Asian, and this part of central London was Mayfair, and it's pretty wealthy, and literally, she was standing there waiting to write a ticket out on this fabulous Maserati, and the bloke had illegally parked, and because he came out and said, oh, no worries, in front of me, she'd kind of torn the ticket up and said, well, no, I won't issue it. I jumped up and ran across the road and said, well, why did you do that? She said, excuse me. I said, why did you not give him a ticket? Anyway, she said, oh, well, I said, no, hang on. If you was on the other side of the river, south of the river, where, you've got sort of, a mixture of sort of people on social housing and whatever, you would put that ticket on and they would have to find that £65, whatever, to pay. But this gentleman obviously has that money to pay. Again, this is me, probably my judgment. And, I kind of sort of pinned her up, not literally, but she was shocked. She was shocked and she was scared because I said, well, look, this should be something reported to your seniors, really. But I didn't. I walked away and I just left it to the hands of God, because I think, well, that's the sort of thing that winds me up is, it's just seeing that, well, he or she's got money or they're off colour, so therefore what I can do this, leave them, let them get away with it. But yeah, sorry, I might be going off course with that, but that was the only recent thing I can remember that kind of that got
You
to
are
me.
not going off. You're not going off course at all, Brendan, because that's a great example of the ticket warden's unconscious bias towards the person who came out to his fancy Maserati. You didn't mention what the ethnicity of the man is, but we can have our own unconscious biases and jump to any conclusion. What's more relevant is that the location was Mayfair, and the individual who owns the car, and the car that is owned by this individual, is an extremely expensive car that most people cannot own. And, it's what it is. And so this ticket warden's unconscious bias was impressed. And without meaning to, she was influenced by that man and tore up the ticket, rightly or wrongly. And I don't blame you at all for dashing across the road, because it is unfair. And of course, if the same ticket warden happened to be in Vauxhall or Stockwell, there was no way that she was going to tear up a ticket, however much you or I pleaded with her. So that's really interesting. And the other part of the conversation that you said, both of which were brilliant and spot on in terms of unconscious bias. And the other bit of the conversation that you shared right now was how you're going to somebody's house. Let's imagine the Mayfair house. We'll just continue with the same location. So for those of us listeners who don't know London, Mayfair is an extremely rich area in terms of wealth, and therefore the people who live there would be considered to be very wealthy. Property is costs a lot, and so on. And for those of us listeners who play Monopoly, it is the most expensive property on the Monopoly board, the purple one. So there is Brendan going in, and I'm making up the story, so forgive me, Brendan, but I'm kind of reinforcing the point that you made. So there is Brendan going to Mayfair to somebody's home. He has spoken to somebody on the telephone. He has never met them. But of course, based on the conversations on the phone, he knows this is a white English man who lives in Mayfair. And your confirmation bias kicks in before you even arrive to ring on the doorbell. And you are saying to yourself, oh, this posh Englishman. Oh my God, it's going to be quite difficult for me when he opens the door and he sees me. What's he going to think? X, Y, Z. That was what you were saying about your unconscious biases. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Spot on.
So and that's great. Then of course that gentleman opens the door and reaches his hand out and is extremely welcoming and shakes your hand, and then you think, whoops, actually that was silly of me. I shouldn't have thought that. And that's what's so interesting about unconscious bias. The fact is we can't even help it. We, without realizing it, hear somebody on the phone or look at the address. I am going to Mayfair, or hear an accent, and without even realizing it, because of our own experiences, which you've clearly had in the past, you jump to a conclusion. So that is the point of unconscious bias, and you don't realize that you've jumped to that conclusion unless you reflect and you look back on it. So you were saying something else as well earlier on, Brandon, which is about how you manage your own unconscious biases. So could you tell us a little bit more about that? You mentioned that you don't like to dwell on it too much. Maybe after 10 or 15 minutes you move on, but please do expand.
Yeah, like I say, I think, as you get a bit older and you kind of wisen up a bit, you kind of look at it like, well, I've got to get on and do a job, and I have to put food on the table for my family, and you try not to let these things get in your way, and you just continue and be a professional. So what I find is I've always walked out. What you see, once I've gone into the property, I always feel I've won, and I've won over that person, because what I've done, I've gone in as a professional. I've not shown any sort of attitude or reaction to, should they treat me or a little bit unfairly or whatever. I smile, I go in as a professional, and then I walk out, and I feel, well, look, at the end of the day, now it's in the great hands should that job come my way, which sometimes I would say 70% it does. But I always walk out feeling as the winner. At the end of the day, this is obviously to build a business. It's to put food on the table, and try not to let these things get to me. Now, when I was a bit younger, then yes, you would be a bit like, you feel we probably sit in the van for like probably say 20 minutes, and you think, oh, let me just defrost a bit. But that's my aim now, is just to go in and treat everyone, no matter who they are, what they think about me, as I would the person I've seen the day before and the day before that, and that's what helps.
That's brilliant. That's really good. So it's really about being professional, not being emotional, and just treating everyone the same. And as you said, you treat everybody the way you would like to be treated yourself. That's great advice. And I'm sure whether we run the same business as you or not is besides the point. It is about being professional in our approach under any circumstances. Brendan Gilbert, this is so very kind of you to have this conversation with me on the unconscious bias. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Stories of Unconscious Bias with me, Smita Tharoor. Stay tuned for the next interview in a week's time. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter for updates on my episodes @Smita Tharoor.